Hey everyone, it's Andy Kushner, host of The Wedding Biz, in which I conduct in-depth and revealing interviews of icons and those I feel are the next generation icons of the industry, the wedding and event industry. All this is to give you education and inspiration. So I am in such a good mood because I just got back from New York City, if some of you saw my Instagram stories. And I was there to interview Mark Ingram of Mark Ingram Atelier, which was really fun. That was a blast. And Mark has a cool announcement that is in the interview. Also, David Mon, just outrageous event planner and designer, was able to go interview him in his apartment, which was spectacular. Also interviewed Darren Olarsh of On the Move Entertainment, and had a blast with Darren, of course, music, something extra close to my heart. So if you missed last week's episode, it was something else. Ray Thompson, founder of Images by Lighting. Ray is a true pioneer and definitely an innovator in the industry of lighting design. He handles Lux Weddings, major film companies, and the biggest award events in the United States. Got to check out that interview. It was so elucidating. If you want to know anything about how to incorporate lighting, how to talk to your lighting designer, what's possible, wow, listen to that one. So this week's interview is of Meghan Ely, and she is the owner of OFD Consulting, an award-winning publicity agency that focuses on the wedding industry in the B2B market, and their client portfolio ranges from top-tier planners and venues to well-regarded national brands and industry thought leaders. Meghan is a longtime industry speaker and writer. She is a Wedding Wire education expert, as well as a regular contributor to Wedding Planner Magazine, Wedding Business Magazine, Cater Source, and SpecialEvents.com. Meghan represents clients globally and has earned them coverage in a slew of major publications, including the New York Times, Martha Stewart Weddings, The Knot, Forbes, many more. And her team's publicity efforts are regularly honored by the Public Relations Society of America. And she is the vice president of the 2009 WIPA National Board and a member of the NACE Conference Education Committee. How does she have time to do anything? Meghan is also an adjunct professor in the Mass Communications Department at Virginia Commonwealth University, specializing in public relations, and most recently, Special Events honored her as one of the top 25 young professionals in the event industry. You want to get some good tips and advice? I'll tell you what, this is it. She gives tips on so many things, including how to find relevant story ideas to pitch to publications, and how to actually pitch your ideas. Also, how you can diversify your offerings in whatever position you're in the industry, as well as getting speaking engagements and so much more. And don't forget to listen Wednesday to the follow-on segment, The Next Level, in which my guest co-host and I tease out some of the highlights and talk about them in a way that'll help you build your business. And I am so excited to say that my guest co-host is going to be Jennifer Stein. That's right, Jennifer Stein, editor-in-chief of Destination I Do magazine. So now enjoy my conversation with Meghan Ely. Hey, Meghan, it is so good to have you on the show. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. I'm so excited to be here today. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we kind of go a long way back.
We do.
I remember that you had first written in more as a listener, saying something about how people were referring to the show about how right, something about speakers hiring PR people. How did that go? It
was so funny. So, I'm a podcast nut myself, and it's and so I had already been listening, and I've been, like I always tell people, I was a pre-serial podcast enthusiast. So I've loved the podcast for years, and I started getting an uptick in the number of referrals and I, of course, do my due diligence and ask, how did you hear about us? And I had a few people say, well, I didn't hear about you on The Wedding Biz, but the people who are being interviewed talk about the importance of PR. So then I looked you up and found you. And so it was a good mix of it was a good tandem between your podcast, and then people would look me up. So thanks to Google and the good people who do my SEO, it was a good little joint effort, and people started reaching out. And so then we all connected, and so longtime listener, and that's how that.
It's such a great story. So I know that, your company is basically a niche wedding PR and marketing agency, but how would you describe what you do to someone who doesn't even know the vocabulary? Like, how would you explain what you do?
That's such a great question because I always tell people, it's different if you're a dentist or an accountant and people just innately know what that is. But when you say wedding PR for a long time, funny enough, I would try and explain what it is. And for 5 minutes, this diatribe, and then somebody would say, oh, so you're a wedding planner. And I'm like, well, no, what just, those last 5 minutes meant nothing to you. So I really had to hone in on explaining it. And so I was actually inspired by my sons in kindergarten, and I did career day there. So it was my biggest speaking engagement yet. And I finally figured it out at a way to explain it to 5 and 6 year olds that I now use for actual adults. And I say, we see the best in our clients and we make sure everybody knows about them. And so we work exclusively with the wedding industry. How we get the word out really depends on whether it's real wedding features all the way up to booking them as speakers, of course, podcasts, interviews. But yeah, no, we see the best in people. We make sure everybody knows about it. And I've stuck to that ever since I came up with it.
See, I like how you say we see the best in everyone. That's a really interesting angle on it. Well, I'm curious where this all started for you. I know from studying up on you that when you were 15, you took some kind of a career test.
I did.
Right? Which indicated that you should be in public relations. But I'm curious, Meghan, do you remember, what was it about your answers that led to that conclusion?
Sure. Well, when it was a bunch of things that would pop up. I loved journalism. I loved writing. I loved being and working with people. I had a sincere interest in the media when I was, and I'm not kidding here, Eddie, when I was probably, I'd say 7 or 8 years old, I was creating magazines at my house with construction paper and talking about celebrities. And so I was in it pretty early on. And so, but my interest in writing continued. And so when the career test spouted that out, I thought to myself, well, it sounds good. I don't know exactly what it means. And over the years, I got a better handle on what it meant and decided, this really could be an area for me. What's funny, most people don't know, I had that sincere interest on the journalism side. I even ended up with an internship. I walked in back then, the newspapers were still really, really big in my hometown. And I literally walked in as this kind of I don't even know, I don't want to say brash. It wasn't like that, but I was 18, 1 year of college under my belt and said, I want an internship here. And they didn't have an internship program. So I was asking for them to invent a job for me. And I tried to dazzle them and I spent a summer with them. And I had been doing some writing and I really enjoyed the aspects of the media. But at the end of the day, I think my interest really did lean on the PR side. And so when I started taking my courses and gearing up, and I even had a time out at the Nike World headquarters. I had an internship out there, which was amazing. And really all of that compiled together, it just really pushed me in that direction.
But why, Meghan? I'm curious, though, what was it about? Here you are, you mentioned going to college to study PR. What is it that got you interested in weddings in particular?
That's a great question. See, I wish I had a cooler answer. You have to remember that when I was in school, it was the age of The Wedding Planner starring J-Lo, that terrifically horrible movie with her and Matthew McConaughey. And so most people assume that those two were mutually exclusive. Well, they're not. It was not one or the other. So I had to really work with people to teach them that at the end of the day, I was not inspired by such a movie. So really the wedding industry to me, it was a very arbitrary time. I was driving to the grocery store. It was so random. I was in college and it just kind of hit me. I thought to myself, I'm a pretty happy person. And the wedding industry just really calls to me as this kind of happy place to be. It was just such stars in my eyes. I'm 20, 21 years old. And it was just this moment where I thought there's something about that industry. And of course, that was the age where print magazines, which they are still, a big force here, but they were particularly big back then. It was before Pinterest. And so I just was exposed in that sort of way and really felt pulled towards it. And so I kind of latched onto that idea throughout school. I would say for the second half of my college years, a lot of my projects were related to the wedding industry. I really went full in pretty quickly. And so for me, I had this real interest in the wedding industry, while equally, I was very interested in the PR side of it. And at the time, it didn't occur to me. You're talking 21 years old, so a lot of things weren't occurring to me to go ahead and combine the two. It took a few more years for that to become more obvious to me.
But that's the thing. Didn't you go through a period of time where you were planning, or weren't you at a country club for a while where you were doing a lot of...
Yeah.
So it wasn't PR to begin with. Were you like director of catering or director of events?
Well, I was a bunch of those things, actually. So what I did was I was out of school, and I was armed with this PR degree and had really enjoyed it, but I kept feeling, just getting this pull to the wedding industry. And so what I did is I actually took a bit of a 180 for a year. And I think it's something that a lot of postgraduate students feel. I actually mentor at my university still, and I still hear this. I just had a lot of interest, and I had to get the attitude that nothing was permanent and I should try everything. So after school, I actually also loved working with children. So I did a year of AmeriCorps, and I worked in the inner city schools. And for me, I just really wanted a year to give back. And with AmeriCorps, there was no better time than right after school. So in the meantime, they pay very, very, very little. I think I made less than $10,000 a year for my first year from AmeriCorps, and I needed to go ahead and get a part-time job. And you can't really do PR part-time in that sense, especially right out of school. So I said, you know what, let me give weddings a try. And so I worked at a historical property called Maymont, gorgeous estate. And it was a couple different spots. It was definitely volume though. So what I would be doing is I was part-time, but I would do at that point, I did 4 weddings a weekend plus 8 birthdays.
Wait a minute. Wait. We got to slow down here. You're saying part-time you did 4 a weekend?
I was doing 4 weddings a weekend, and don't forget the birthdays as well. So I was doing birthdays. I would work Wednesday, I think it was like a couple of nights a week and then all weekend. Because when you're, 22, you have boundless energy. So I just worked every single weekend.
But what was your responsibilities in terms of the event side? Let's talk about the weddings. What were your responsibilities for these weddings?
So what we would do is typically at that point, there was another person who, Heather, who was wonderful. She's my boss, and she's actually now the godmother to my son. So we're still very close after all these years. And so she was the full-time person who would be booking them. She was wonderful at it. She helped detail most of them out based on the hours she had. And so then I would come in and I would detail near the end. She handled the paperwork, and I would do execution day of. So you could almost consider me almost like I was a venue person. But it would be the equivalent, not quite the equivalent, but the concept of a day of coordinator that 30 days out, you start to go ahead and take the details and execute. I was doing that, but as a venue person. So I would never call myself a planner, but yeah, it was crazy. It took a lot of organization to be able to run those, because if you think about it, they would book with one person, and then I would have to come in as this, 22-year-old who just started paying my own electricity bills. And now I'm handling the biggest day of their lives.
Well, so what would you say were some of the main things that you learned from that whole experience that helped you take forward for eventually when you started your company?
That's a great question. So, once I was there, I did move to a country club and spent the remaining time, about 3.5 years at a 5-star property. So I had 3 spots where I was before I took the leap over. And so there's a few different things that I could take over. One is the industry knowledge. So that's a huge part of just carrying that over to the wedding industry now. So when I sit down with someone, I'll give you a great example. I sat with a client yesterday, and we are working on a presentation. She is presenting shortly. And so I sat down with her and pulled everything. I call it a brain dump. I wish I had a cooler name for it, but that's what it is. And she gave me everything she possibly could. But because it's sales and it's related to the wedding industry, because of my 16, 17 years of doing it, I'm not just taking notes. I'm asking thoughtful questions back at her from different aspects based on my experience.
Like what?
Like I would say, okay, it's great, that's your script, but tell me, what if a couple comes in and XYZ happens? How do you handle that? And I'm pulling from my own experiences. Or if I've got, let's say, Pop Sugar comes to us, or Brides.com, Martha Stewart Weddings, and they need, they've got these topics, and they said, I really need your help on, wedding day etiquette for X, Y, and Z. What's great about that is I don't have to just go to my clients and ask them for quotes. What I can do is come up with a series of interview questions based on the topic, and I pull from my own experiences and say, oftentimes we see this happen. How would you handle this? And so we use our extensive background to be able to pull more information out, because it's one thing to go to someone and say, hey, what are your top trends? But then if I can turn it on its side a little bit and say, well, you mentioned this is a trend, but how does it work logically? Because I'm thinking about it from this point of view. And they'll say, oh, I never, didn't think about it from that side. And so it allows to have that background in working. I did about 1,000 events total before I went out and did PR. That was a huge part of it, is I really wanted to be in the industry before I consulted to the industry. I feel like there's a lot of amazing people out there who consult and, are on behalf of the industry, but I really feel like there's this great edge that we have because we've been in the trenches with them, and it comes up a lot.
So when it came time to start your company, OFD Consulting, that was also a leap, I would say, I'm curious just for a moment about, did you have money saved to do it? Did you have to just take a leap of faith in a sense? Like, I'm curious about the emotional side of dealing with that. Because a lot of us, who are listening, some people they're working for somebody, maybe they're in the industry, maybe they're not. They want to go full time. Maybe they are dabbling in it. That's a big move, Meghan, to go from the success that you were having and the experience, because you could have gotten hired in a variety of places following. How did you handle that aspect of it, the leap?
I handled it the exact opposite of what I should have done, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
So what happened, and I have to be careful. I go into the story, but I don't dig in too much. So I left this 5-star property, and it very amicably, like it was time to move on. I had been there for 3.5 years. I enjoyed everything I learned. And to be perfectly honest, to your point before, in here, is that I learned a lot about that 5-star service and just the art of hospitality from them that I still think that comes over in the way that we treat our clients and also our journalists and also the people who book speakers. So,
well, and no matter what position you're in, I think that's critical.
Oh yeah, that level of hospitality. So anyways, I left there amicably. They threw me a lovely party. It was time for me to move on. Hotel life is very stressful. And I was 27, 28, and I was literally on the verge of an ulcer. That's something medically, like a doctor kit. It was so stressful at that level. And the doctor said to me, well, I can give you medication for this. And I literally thought to myself, why don't I change my life? Why do I, I'm not going to stay for the foreseeable future. So I found this great fit. I had somebody, or so I thought. On paper it was. I accepted a director of catering job. It was a position, and bear in mind, this is 2009, right when the recession was really hitting the industry. And so it was a leap to move over to them. It was going to be a 6-figure salary, which at that age in Richmond, Virginia, at that level, I could guarantee I was in the top 5% of what people were earning at that position. And so I really worked my way up. And the plan was to be there for a couple of years and then start OFD. I always knew I was going to do it, but I needed, like you said, I need to just save the money. And because I was taking such a huge leap in salary, the thought was, why don't I live off of old salaries and take that money and tuck it away at this point? And so I ended up, I was there for 3 weeks. I was there. I won't go into the dirty laundry of it all, but I was working for someone who is incredibly unstable. And we're talking about, someone who I am just methodical. I interviewed them as much as myself. I've been warned by a couple of people, but I thought, no, I've known this guy like 5 years. I don't think, it's fine. And the money's great. I went in and it was someone who was drinking on the job. It was very unstable. I was at a point where after 3 weeks, we had just bought our first home. I was engaged, now married, spoiler alert, and we were about to buy we just bought a house, about to pay for our wedding. And I couldn't stay there a moment longer. I turned to my now husband, Travis, and I said, I can't, I'm getting panicked when I walk in. He is unstable. He's scary. I don't feel safe there. So I left and filed for, when you leave, you don't usually file for unemployment, but I filed for hostile work environment because I was like, this is
interesting.
Yeah.
Didn't even know that existed, that possibility.
It does, when you have to leave because of unsafe conditions. And it was a bold move because for me to come in after all of this, and he was trying to get me for years. And so anyways, my point is, here, my plan suddenly fell apart. And to know me is to know I'm a very type A personality. I've got a plan always, but plans have a way of changing. So what I said to my husband was, I said, before I decide what the next move is, I need a week off because
I thought you were about to say like a month off. You have the ulcers. You have the ulcers. Yeah. You leave that. You come
almost
to this.
Ulcers. I was almost there.
A week is plenty of time.
Yeah, plenty of time.
Listen, for you, I have a feeling that in your life, a week is like a normal 2 months for us, the rest of us.
A week is unbelievable. Yeah. So I said I need a week off because the hotel I had worked at for so many years, we only got 5 days off a year. And that's including like sick days. That includes if you're moving. And so for me, a week felt very like, and so I ended up going ahead and just, visiting some friends, and he was very supportive. And so from there, I was talking, Heather, the person who was my old boss at the first job and all that. And I was talking to her and she goes, well, why don't you start your company now? And I said, well, because that's not the plan. And she goes, well, plans change. I mean, this is obvious. So why don't you consider it? So I ended up, I said, you know what? I'm going to do it. This is very uncharacteristic of me. I usually test things to death, which to this day, every new endeavor I have has been tested to death. But with this, I went on a leap of faith. So I went ahead and I was just offered a full-time job in medical sales, and I turned it down, which had full benefits, and instead took a part-time job with a really great, it's an association management group. I worked part-time so I could start OFD. So I ended up getting this job from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. I actually did a lot of negotiation of contracts between hotels and associations having conferences. I was a really good fit for that. And then from 1:01 p.m. till about midnight every single day, I would work on OFD. And I took the leap, and it was a leap of faith. I've never done anything like that since, but it was just one of these things. I was having a hard time getting in the middle of this terrible economy. I mean, you remember it. I was having a hard time getting hired because I had too much experience at that point, and everybody was, the unemployment rate was really high. And I said, you know what, let's go ahead and do this. And I had nothing saved for it. We had emergency savings. Yeah, we had emergency savings. We're really pretty fiscally responsible. And I always encourage people when they're looking to make a leap, you better have the money for that, because you can't just go on a wing and a prayer and hope for the best. And so I set aside $600 is all I could set aside. And in Virginia, it's $100 to get an LLC. So let's just assume I only had $500, but Travis is a web designer. So he kindly did my first website for free. And then I went for it. So it was a leap of faith, again, which is pretty uncharacteristic for me, but I had to bet on myself, and I'm glad I did.
Well, and here's the thing. I'm, in a minute, I want to get into, I have a whole lot of questions to help us in the industry with the knowledge that you have. But before we get there, how did you, well, first of all, I understand that you decided to niche it down. Was that after you had started it, or when you had started it to the B2B?
I did the niche at the very beginning, was just to be focused on anyone in the wedding industry trying to get in front of their couples.
How did you decide that?
That was because I did a little bit there was some research involved, and there were so few people doing it at the time. Even now, there's only about a dozen of us who serve from a publicity sense for wedding professionals. So I thought, I'm either going to take this leap and it's a great idea because almost no one is doing it, or no one's doing it because there isn't a need. And so I really wanted to combine my love of the wedding industry and combine it with PR, which was always the direction I wanted to go. And so at the very beginning, the niche was as such kind of laid out for me. And then, as you can imagine, I was actually my first client. So I represented myself, of course.
That's a great example. And why not?
Well, yeah, why not? And so I was speaking and teeny stuff to get me started, and which I'm so appreciative for the people who gave me the chance. Loved writing. So I wrote for anybody who had a website. You could have 5 people who come to it. I actually used to, most people don't know this there's this now defunct site. I won't name it by name, but I had an advice column on it, like a wedding marketing advice column where people would write in and I'd answer it, but no one ever wrote me. So I came up with the questions and the answers. And so give it a bunch of years, and I'm working with some great people in the industry by referrals, by people finding me on Google from speaking. And finally, someone about 4 years ago came to me and said, I really want to get in front of, I see what you're doing, but I want to get in front of your audience. You are putting yourself in front of wedding pros, and I want that audience. And I went, oh my God, of course, I would never have thought of.
Right. So a light bulb went off for you?
Yeah, a huge, probably the biggest light bulb since I started the company. And so I would say about 4 years ago, we started simultaneously. We kind of expanded and said, listen, because there are people, if you think about it, there's going to be software companies that want to get in front. They want to be educators. That's a great way to enter into the market and build trust, and people see them as a community player and understand that. But then we also have these top tier, amazing planners, lighting specialists, venues who say, I'm ready to take that next step and build my personal brand. I'm ready to go ahead and maybe mentor other people. I want to stand up for my competitors. So we started serving both the markets. And then in the last 6 months, we've made a really definitive push where we said, you know what, moving forward, we are going to niche ourselves back down where we do serve people who want to get in front of engaged couples through our a membership program we have. But then those who come to us from that retainer level where we're really literally like with them all the time. I always joke it's like we're in their pocket. We're building thought leaders at this point, and most of the time they're in front of their peers.
Well, so let's start to really dig in here. Now, I obviously the media landscape is really changing, and when you consider things like the Wedding Wire, the Knot merger, blogs closing down, Martha Stewart wedding, announcement of pretty much starting to shut down their print operations. How do you feel this whole thing has evolved in terms of how it impacts wedding PR strategies?
I've got to say, the last 18 months have been crazy here. We're always expecting things evolving with the media, but I think it really started. I mean, we've been kind of sniffing it out, and that's the thing is, most things don't surprise us because we've got our finger on the pulse. We're really focused on the media. But I got to say, I was knocked over backwards with Style Me Pretty. I mean, I could never have. I probably that was less surprising than the merger with the Knot and Wedding Wire. And then also Martha Stewart Print was such a surprise because I was just at Engaged chatting with them, and then 2 days later this comes out, and so it's so interesting to me. And so these days it's all about diversifying. So we try our very hardest to look ahead and would encourage other wedding professionals. You can't put all your eggs in one basket. Great example, Style Me Pretty with that big announcement. There were people panicked about that, saying I send most of my stuff there. And I thought to myself, well, this is going to be a huge lesson that you can't just get everything from one place, because unless you're controlling it, there's really no guarantee. And so these days, what we're doing for clients is we're hoping to really redefine what promotion means. Yes, it's real wedding features. Does it always have to be print? Well, no, there's a lot of great online, and we're starting to give a lot of love to, in that respect, to like the niche outlets, the people who are local, these spots like Maharani, where it's focused on South Asian weddings or, and so on, and Smashing the Glass, which is a really great, Jewish wedding blog. And so we're giving a lot of love to those guys in diversifying what successful promotion means, but we're also looking to other mediums. I would contend podcasts, I'm sure you'd agree with me, continue to be on the rise. It's a wonderful way to showcase your portfolio. No, you can discuss your portfolio and expertise, but also your personality, which, couples want to know you from a personality standpoint. But it's also, we've seen an increase in those interested in speaking. It's not just conferences and being regional, it's also doing Facebook Live. So for us, we're constantly asking ourselves, what does PR mean? What does promotion really mean? Because at the end of the day, we're at the mercy of the editors, and the editors, they're at the mercy of other factors as well. And so we're constantly finding ways to diversify and get the name out.
Well, and I've got a question about that. First, I want to mention, though, for everyone listening, you talked about Style Me Pretty, Maharani weddings. I had just fascinating conversation interview with Abby and Tate Larson of Style Me Pretty, and it's back September 10 of 2018. So people may want to check that out to see what Megan's talking about. And Abby and Tate really got deep. And then also Shauna Gohill with Maharani Weddings. That was September 11th of 2017. So those are interesting. But, you're also talking about staying relevant, which is just feels like in terms of, I'm talking about I'm saying, I guess, PR, like to stay relevant and get published today with this totally changing landscape that you're talking about. And I understand, obviously I'm a proponent of podcasts and getting, like you say, just getting articles written about you, writing articles, blogs, guest spots, whatever you can do. But to stay relevant, to get published in today's competitive market, are there any tips you can give for that?
Absolutely. I say keep your ear to the ground of what's happening. I think pop culture is actually a really great way to stay relevant and speak to things that are happening around you. A great example, the big royal wedding from the last year, of course, Meghan Markle, new parents, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. And, when that happened, every time Meghan Markle did anything or Prince Harry, they made a decision, they made an announcement, that was an opportunity to be listening, paying attention and pitching writers. based off of that. Good example would be there was a huge hubbub several months prior to their wedding day where there was a kind of well-placed rumor that they were going to skip the traditional fruitcake and go for a banana cake, which in the end they didn't, but at the time it was gaining steam. Well, if you're somebody who takes, 5-10 minutes every couple of days just to run a search on the keyword wedding online and see what's popping up and paying attention to those sort of things, that would be an easy way for you to reach out.
And not to interrupt you, but I want to take a moment on that. It seems so obvious, yet I have not done that.
I know. Well, there's a million other things people are trying to do serving their clients. So for me, it's like a block scheduling thing. I tell people, take 5 to 10 minutes, run a search on weddings, because we already, sit in some Facebook groups and listen. Go on Reddit. There's wedding people talk. There are couples talking all the time about things on there, and ask yourself, how can I work off of that? So be it a pop culture thing, like I said, the banana cake thing hit steam. And so before long, we went ahead and we were reaching out to writers and talking about, well, what are alternative? Do you have to go? What are your options above and beyond the standard traditional stuff? And is it okay to make those changes? And so keeping your ear to the ground on that. David's Bridal filing bankruptcy was another opportunity. It really stunk, of course, for the brand itself and the people who work for them. So I don't want to look too much like an opportunist here, but there is a story to be told on that. And we jumped on that and made sure that some of our clients were chiming in on the way the industry is changing. So even if you take 5 to 10 minutes every couple, and do it Monday, Wednesday, Friday, do it Tuesday, Thursday, whatever it is, make it consistent. Spend some time just kind of lurking. You don't want to start being really involved in it, but if you belong to a couple of wedding Facebook groups where couples are, or even on Reddit where people are chatting back and forth, and listen and ask yourself, how could what they're talking about be turned into a relevant article? Because at the end of the day, I can't speak on behalf of the media because I'm not a member of the media, but based on my observations, at least, I find that they tend to be short on fresh topics and time. So if you can come to them based on your experiences of what you're going through over the weekend, things you're observing, you can speak to things in pop culture. That's what's going to keep you relevant in on their virtual Rolodex, if you will, to be interviewed in the future for articles.
Well, and what should you do? It's interesting. I was going to ask, how do you pitch that? I would also like to know, what do you not do when pitching? I'm sure people get themselves in a lot of trouble and just don't get what they want.
Absolutely. Now, I belong to a few publicist groups that also include people who are in the media, and I hear a lot of the same complaints over and over again. And so pitching folks, the big thing is to really get to know them as a person, get to know their writing before you reach out. So say you want to be on Martha Stewart Weddings, right? And they have a really robust section of great articles, and most of them tend to be freelancers these days, and talking about how the media cycle, how things have changed and evolved. A lot of these folks, you're not seeing huge staffs of writers. Instead, they're freelance writers who write for multiple outlets. So, jump on their site, take a look at who's doing a lot of the wedding writing, see if they've got a personal site where you can get to know them a little bit. And most journals have what's called a beat, or they have multiple beats, which means, they maybe write about weddings, but they really veer into certain areas. So maybe they talk about destination weddings and honeymoons a lot, or beauty, or entertainment, decor. They're going to come into these particular beats. So find the people whose beats are most aligned with your area of expertise and get to know them. Follow them on Instagram if they have a public profile. Just get to know them as people more than anything. And then when you're writing them, I tend to tell people, talking about the do's and do nots, do keep it short. Do keep it short. Don't be cute. Not the first time. You can form a relationship over time, but stick to this script. Have a subject line that's not cute and silly and funny. Just be like story idea or guest idea or introduction, something that just catches their attention in 3 seconds or less. And then when you're reaching out to them, write them and use their name, and I know that sounds obvious, but even I have made that mistake where I'm writing 3 or 4 emails at once, and I'll send it and go, no, I wrote Ann down, but I meant Kristen or whatever. Right. And so make sure you get the name correct there. Let them know right away why you're reaching out. I'm reaching out. I've been a longtime reader. I have story ideas that I thought could be a fit. A lot of people, here's a do not. People jump in and want to give their bio immediately. But you have to remember these journals they have 3 to 5 seconds to read this email. They do not have time to get the diatribe about what it is about you. Don't make it about yourself. Another tip, don't make it about yourself, make it about them. Introduce yourself. I'm Meghan Ely, I'm OFD Consulting. Been reading your column at Martha or breads.com, whatever, and want to take a moment to reach out. I've got a few story ideas that I thought could be a fit. Go ahead, quick and dirty. Give them, 3 or 4. Another one is don't overwhelm. Do not send more than, 2 to 3 story ideas, which, you want to stick to what interests you and what could be a fit for them.
I also have another question, kind of in a different direction. So I don't know if it's a shift exactly, but we're seeing seasoned veterans out there and even not real seasoned, but trying to create multiple revenue streams. And so these seasoned ones are diversifying more and more and more. Colin Cowhey talks about it a lot. Both interviews of him, especially my second one, and they're selling to their peers as well, not just necessarily products, services to the consumers, but to their peers. What do you think about that?
I think it's great. In one way, I think it's wonderful if you're going to have the opportunity where people if you've got a seasoned veteran, let's start with them, and you have people on their way up and they can learn how to be better at their jobs and better serve the industry, that's going to raise everybody up. Now, I'm not keen on, and I'm sure I'm not the only one here listening, my listeners will agree, I'm not keen on someone who isn't that established suddenly diversifying. It's not a stay in your lane sort of conundrum in this sense, but it's have you been doing this long enough to really say something different and to really serve your fellow wedding professionals? I mean, I have seen people who, and we're not going to name names here, of course, but people who have had pretty tough careers where things did not go their way. Companies have closed down, people have been let go of things. And the thought is, well, are you authentically bringing something that will benefit other people? So I do question sometimes with that. And I would say also, but under the right circumstances, I think it's wonderful for the industry. I think we just have to, one of the things, if I can make a prediction looking ahead, based on what I'm seeing, I do a lot with people with submitting to awards and speaking things and what have you. And we're overall seeing a huge uptick in the number of people wanting to get in front of their peers as educators for one reason or another, like diversifying. We are hitting a point of saturation, and really the cream will rise to the top. That's what I tell people all the time. I say, listen, I know you're concerned about other educators in the market, but if you can bring quality, there's room for you. But I do start seeing it being saturated, and not always by the right people. So the big question, or the big, I would say, challenge we all have to think about is, well, what can I bring to the table that's different, that's authentic, and that will truly, not only it will serve the greater public, but it will also be a smart business decision for me. Because, I just had a chat with somebody who said, oh yeah, I really want to I don't see a lot in the way of wedding planner education. And I stopped them and I said, are you serious?
No, really?
Because I can name 50 right now. I think the bigger question is, if you want to do something like this, how can you be different?
So let's say that we're out there, we get these ideas, we kind of test them out, we find a different way to do it, we now have something. How do we get the message out to our industry peers?
Well, it starts with your own channels. I always tell people this, and you can't assume that people understand that you're going in this different direction. This conversation either needs to be changed about you depending on how much of a percentage it'll take up of your company, versus if you're still doing what you do day to day, you want to maintain that. And so start with your own channels. Start with, working on a blog, having something that really shares your expertise in the B2B space. That's what I did. I mean, before anyone would listen to me, I really wanted to make sure that I would go ahead and share my thoughts on a blog and social media so they could learn from me just for free in my own channels. And I started building a following that way. And then it's time to move on to my friend Katie Easley. She's great. She talks about social proof, and I'm a huge fan of that concept. So the idea is, if you want to get the message out about this kind of B2B side, you really need that third-party credibility. And yes, it's in the form of testimonials and things like that. But really on the PR side, it's all about getting published. I mean, it's reaching out to some of these great spots like Cater Source, Special Events, Wedding Wire EDU had a great blog for a long time, Wedding IQ. I mean, I could go on and on. Go to these sites and pitch the idea of guest writing to them, because it's one thing to share your expertise, which is great, but it's something else when there's a gravitas added to it, when you've got an editor who agrees and says, you know what, we'll go ahead and publish this. It's that third party credibility. So that's how you start to get the word out. The good news is now versus 10 years ago when I started, there are more traditional advertising methods to get the word out about what it is that you're doing. So you could absolutely partner with some of those media outlets.
Like what? Can you give us some examples?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm actually in talks with a couple spots, but right now where, the thought is for some of these B2B places like specialevents.com, for example, they have really robust media kits where you can invest in, and I can't speak to whether or not they can customize, but they do sponsored posts and they have banner advertising and they have different ways to get your name out, email blasts and things like that. So if you're looking to do something along those lines, there are plenty of opportunities. 10 years ago, there was no way to do that. And I would also say speaking. Speaking is a great way to share what you're doing in front of an audience, even if you don't spend a single second actually talking about yourself as a company. If you're sharing your expertise, the people will come. I would say Wedding Wire, they tease me because I get introduced one time at one of the earlier Wedding Wire Worlds, and they said, about to introduce Meghan Ely. She's the only one here who's going to teach you how to do what she does. So you don't hire her. Like I would do how to do your own PR. But kind of the joke was on them because I'd go up there and teach people and hopefully people were inspired. But there was a good chunk of the audience who would listen and say, oh, this is great. But yeah, I don't want to actually do any of that. So I'm going to hire you. So bingo.
Well, and in terms of speaking, I know that, you travel a lot, you do speak, and that one of the things you talk about is how professionals can take their wedding day stories and form them into media pitches. Can you say something about that?
Absolutely. So it goes back to some of the ideas that you want to come up with. We talk about leveraging pop culture, for example, and pitching to these wedding media outlets. Well, so too, instead of just following, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle around and doing that, what you can do is really get inspired by your own stories every single weekend. And even though it's been 10 years, I remember the crazy stuff that would happen. I still listen to all the crazy things that happen with some of my clients. And I always ask them and say, well, that sounds like that was a disaster. What kind of articles can we pull? What kind of story inspiration? I'll give you an example. I had this horrific wedding many years ago. I would say it was the biggest, I hate the term bridezilla, but for what it's worth, that's what it was. That was in the purest sense, that's what it was. And she ended up having this complete tantrum on us because she booked a weekend in the Richmond area that was also marathon weekend. And for us, we helped her through how to navigate that, but it still went awry when she took matters in her own hands. And if I was doing OFD at the time, there's definitely something that could be inspired from that, saying, gosh, I wish there were some articles out there about how do you navigate a wedding day when there are other things going on in town? Like how do you go up against races and festivals, and how do you be mindful of hotel room blocks during these things going on? If you're in Austin and want to get married around the same time as South by Southwest, and so those are the things that you do. You take a little notebook around with you. Maybe there's different apps where you can keep this and come up with some of these crazy things that happen and then revisit them and say, how could have our couples been better prepared for what happened by reading something about it? And that's how you really harness that power of storytelling and turn them into story ideas that you can pitch to members of the media.
And in terms of speaking, let's talk about that too. It's for many people, it's very difficult for them to be able to get up in front of people, let alone how to put it together in an engaging way and in a concise way and in a way that doesn't leave you too anxious doing it. Do you have any suggestions for how to prepare yourself to speak?
Absolutely. I think people who have an interest in speaking need to first have an honest conversation with themselves, because it's kind of am I interested in doing it? Sure. But am I the right fit for that? So hopefully they've gone through the rigors of really thinking about what it takes to be in front of a crowd, very polished, in putting the time into that. And if they're ready to take that step, one of the best things you can do is start pitching yourself virtually. So start pitching yourself to podcasts, start pitching yourself to webinars, put yourself in a position where it's conversational and you can really start talking about the topics that you want to cover. It's a really great way to, I'd like to think it's a win-win for everybody. If picked up, it's great content for the podcast host as well as, of course, the listeners. Same on the webinar side, but it gives someone practice just to talk about what they're speaking on. One of the big things that we're doing for our speakers moving forward is we're working really hard to secure some, especially for more of our newer speakers, as they book things, we're booking Facebook Live opportunities. I would say Facebook groups are really the future. I mean, we're seeing that every indication is pointed towards that. More and more of these groups are being hosted for wedding professionals, for couples. And so a lot of them are wanting to offer more standard education, and they're open to people coming on and doing. They can either present on Facebook Live, it can be more of a conversation, but those are great ways to build your confidence, get you used to really talking about these things and moving forward.
Oh, that's a great idea. And what about, in addition to like Facebook Live and all that, what about pitching for a speaking engagement to an organization or to a conference? Any tips on how to pitch?
Absolutely. So with the local, you have to realize that, of course, there's some great national groups that have local regional chapters. So we're talking the NACEs and WIPA and ILEA and MPI and so on and so forth. And there's a lot of great private organizations throughout the U.S. and beyond as well. And so with those guys, bear in mind that most of these program chairs are volunteers who are your peers. And so reaching out to them, do a little bit of due diligence. Look at the site. Let's say you're really focused on, I'm just making this up, but like New York NACE or New York WIPA. Take a look at their site. See what kind of topics they've had in the last year. You're going to see some commonalities there. And then have a conversation. Reach out to the program chair if there's not a formal way to submit, and introduce yourself. Ask them, I just want to reach out to see what's the process for being considered to come speak. Is there any, can you send me in the right direction? Let them know that you've looked at their education for the last year or two, and maybe offer a couple of topics that are yours that would be fresh and inspiring to the group, but complementary to what seems to be the overall goals. I always tell people that any sort of press or pitching, we think it's publicists with a bullhorn. 90% of it is listening and paying attention. It's doing that research before you reach out. Now, on the national side, most of them have formal submission guidelines. So the best thing you can do is get on their radar early, go ahead and sign up for the email blast so that as soon as it goes live, most of them at least give you 30, 45 days, if not more than that. And so to sit down and map out, it's very unsexy, but get a Word document and map out exactly what they're looking for so that you can put some thought into it. Use every ounce of time that you need. And just know with national, I have to make sure I'm careful the way I word this, but when it comes to national, have realistic expectations if you're newer. A lot of them do want to see 6, 7, 8 different places that you've been. Not all of them, but a lot of them are going to ask about your experience.
But isn't that a catch-22?
It is. And that's a tough one. So what I would say is focus on the local to start.
Great idea.
Yeah, focus on the local. And listen, if you want to hit the national scene, but you don't have the experience, why not put a panel together where you've got to, hitch your wagon to the star of a few folks who, and make it a win-win. Ask a few folks who are known speakers and see if you can put something together where, they can offer their expertise, but they're not doing a lot of the heavy lifting, and make sure it's a topic that doesn't conflict with what else they're doing. That's how I got my start. My first national was the special event. I never would have done it if I hadn't worked with a couple of great folks who were kind enough to put me on panels for a couple of years. I mean, that's how that all panned out. It was moving up the ranks from there. But yes, start local, start virtual, build your confidence. If you really are right place, right time to hit some of the national stuff, then see if you can work out some panels to get you started. Because what if you submit yourself, you have no experience, you somehow squeak by, and man, I got to say, it's very exciting to get picked up, but I bet it gets nerve wracking because then you're like, well, now I have to actually do it. So
yes, I've experienced that more than a number of times. So before we wrap up, or as we wrap up, I would guess, Meghan, that you are probably an absolute master networker. I mean, you're right. I'm sure everywhere you go. Can you give any overall tips about networking in order to, set yourself up, as we've been talking all along, to be in a position to be out there known as a thought leader. What do you do for networking?
Absolutely. I think that, well, one of the best, there's this great book called Never Eat Alone. And they say your network is your net worth. And I've said that 1,000 times to people. I firmly believe that the people we surround ourselves really are what's of value. And to put a statistic behind it, in my first 2 years of OFD, 90% of my contracts were actually from either people I knew or referrals from people I knew. So I saw it firsthand. And I would say the best attitude you can have going in is how can you help others? It's not what are these people going to do for me? It's what can I do for them? I go into a room. I try my best to know who's going to be there in advance. That doesn't always pan out. Try to set goals ahead of time. Like when we went to Engage for the first time, I sat down with a friend of mine, Morgan, ahead of time over coffee and just kind of hashed out, what are the goals? What has to happen from a networking standpoint for this to be considered success? And then anywhere I go on site, it really is about listening and offering assistance. It could be down to you're meeting with someone and chatting with them and it's local and you find out that they're newer to town and you offer to hook them up with a car place because they have a car issue. I mean, it could be as basic as that. It could be a planner you're chatting with or a venue maybe. And the venue says, yeah, I really need a couple more florists. And maybe you're a planner and that's not going to help you very much, but why don't you be the person to introduce them to the florist? So really having that attitude has served me well for well over 15, 16 years.
Well, that's great. Well, what is the best way for people to find out more about you?
Sure. They can always find me at ofdconsulting.com. I'm also listed over at, we just launched weddingindustryspeakers.com. So we can always connect there. And you can pretty much find me anywhere on social with OFD Consulting. Best way to catch me.
Well, great. Well, Meghan, this has been, my God, the information. First of all, your story is really so cool. It's also a story of persistence. And I always love that. And
thank you.
Yeah. And really putting your heart out there and taking a risk going for it, but calculated risk. And also all the tips and advice you've given. I really thank you. So thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with Meghan Ely. Check out her website at ofdconsulting.com. Again, ofdconsulting.com. Also, check out her collective, which is ofdcollective.com. You can also look at her listing of speakers she represents at weddingindustryspeakers.com. Again, weddingindustryspeakers.com. Her social media handles, it's simple, it's OFD Consulting. And also check out the show notes at my website of theweddingbiz.com. Please, please, please forward this to all your friends and colleagues. It'll really help the industry to better understand how they can publicize what they do in the most positive way. This is such a good one. And so let me mention next week's episode. This is so exciting. Kiana Underwood, floral designer of Tulipina. I'm sure when I say Tulipina, you know who I'm talking about. Kiana has hundreds of thousands of Instagram followers as well. Every photo is amazing. So this is going to be a great interview with Kiana next week. So I want to thank our sponsor for today, KushnerEntertainment.com, and we'll catch you next week on The Wedding Biz.